Well, hello and welcome to our fourth and final backyard conversation. Tonight is a little bit of an addendum. I am actually going to walk us through some tough conversations with some practical tips for how we can navigate those waters when we're finding ourselves defensive or attacked or uncomfortable or not sure how to engage someone who sees the world really differently than we do. For the purposes of these conversations tonight, these are mostly tips on how to engage folks who don't really believe that racism is a problem. And so this is less about how to reach across lines of difference to someone who is living in a more vulnerable position than you. And it's often about reaching across those lines of difference for maybe your own family members or other white coworkers or people who think that it's unpatriotic to protest or things like that. And so I'm hopeful that these tips can help you as you think about your own way that you carry yourself. I will also, just by way of sort of backtracking, remind you that I'm Dr. Brandy Kellett, and this is the fourth in a series of backyard conversations that we hosted in June of 2020 after our country sort of had a racial awakening about the pervasiveness of racism, the injustice in so many of our systems, and even in the way that we try to protect and serve one another. And so we try to create a space in our backyard during the COVID pandemic to allow people, to allow white people to explore our relationship to whiteness, to understand and be taught about white supremacy and history and culture, to understand what it means to listen empathetically, to lean into this work, to understand how to recognize our privilege, how to manage our fragility, and how to really move toward others with embodied solidarity as we serve and benefit from our relationships with people who are different than us. And so this is the last talk that will be a little shorter because we are just leaning into how to think about how to have tough conversations. And so I'll just offer you some thoughts on tough conversations. Everyone has a different approach to how to do this well. For some people, I would say that the main thing that you want to do before you engage with another person is to begin with the end in mind. So think about what you want to offer and what you're not willing to offer. Think about how you want to walk away from the conversation. And I'll just confess that for me, I feel like part of my life's work is to provide people with on-ramps to conversations about race and to the work of becoming anti-racist. And so for me, it is important for me to convey my discomfort with racialized thinking that's been unexamined, but it is not as important to me to sort of label or accuse someone of racism or to label them as a racist. And so in following sort of in the footsteps of Ibram Kendi, I think it is important for us to instead invite other people to become anti-racist, to explore our own biases. I think that our unacknowledged implicit bias leads to explicit wounding and diminishment and oppression of other people and their bodies. And so it's important for us to model what it looks like to acknowledge our bias rather than to just sort of point a finger and call someone a word that most people would never want to be, which is a racist. And so for other people, it is really important to challenge that boldly and to say that out loud and to like label what someone just said as not okay. My approach is much more, I hope, not reconciling in a way that centers comfort of racist people, but to offer people a way back. And so I would say some of the tenets of tough conversations for me are one, to keep the conversation alive. And you do that by giving people a way back. We all say stupid crap and we all say things that we regret and we all get stuff wrong. And so part of my goal in these hard conversations is to give people a way back to help them understand what they said and why it's not okay. One of the other tools that I use is to invite someone else's thoughts by engaging in active listening. So repeat what someone just said to you in a way that lets them hear what they just said out loud. So instead of you editing it or editorializing it and saying, that's not okay to say, tell me what you mean by the fact that, all immigrants are criminals who are ruining our country. Or tell me what you mean by the fact that that school is bad news and that you would never send your kids there. Tell me what that means to you. Part of the work of repeating what someone said in an active listening way will often lead to an awkward pause. And so I would say the other big part of having tough conversations is that you need to be okay with an awkward pause. Don't feel it. Don't be afraid of it. Just let it sit. So often the way that these sentiments continue, these racist sentiments are unchallenged and continue, especially in white spaces, is that we all operate on this, a level of shared assumption. So people can say things without really saying them, and everyone sort of nods knowingly, like, I know what you mean. I'm not going to make you say it out loud. Or we fill in awkward pauses and sort of excuse people away. The main way that we allow people to spurt evil in our presence is that we prioritize their comfort and their inclusion instead of the person that they're insulting or the people group that they're insulting. And so to engage in these tough conversations, you have to commit to not privilege a racist person's feelings. It doesn't mean you want to hurt their feelings, but it means that you're not going to protect them. Instead, you're going to help reveal to them that what they said is not okay around you. So one of the other ways to do that is to avoid hyperbole, avoid sarcasm. If you can concede, if you share some dynamic or share some interaction or share a sentiment, then name that. Find the places where you agree and then build on that. Another tidbit I can give you is to share your experience, not your position. It's very easy, I think, in these conversations to want to throw out statistics, and then you're just basically having an MSNBC, Fox News catfight. And that rarely, in my experience, helps change anyone's mind or helps bring even any kind of reconciliation around or searching or observation. And so instead, share your experience. Like, rely on what you know about the world and what you've seen about the world and what you've experienced about the world, not what a news channel has told you. And so the big picture for me is that I'm trying to offer people an on-ramp. I'm trying to make it easier for the next person they encounter to continue to move the ball forward, because these are long-held views. We're very bad at talking about race in general in our country, and we all need a little help, and every conversation can help chip away at those unexamined views that we hold, so that before we know it, we're examining them, confronting them, changing them, becoming anti-racist. The big picture is that you really, to be responsible for what's said and done around you, you have to be responsible for your own body, for your own emotions, for your own thoughts. So pay attention to you. You need to know exactly where you stand so that you're not reactive. You need to be grounded and be able to hold your tongue. You need to allow those awkward pauses to exist. And then I always say, like, have an exit strategy. Know what you're about. Are you trying to change their mind? Are you trying to get them to say that they're totally wrong and you're totally right? Are you trying to help them see the humanity in another person? Are you trying to help them see that their point of view might not be the only one? What are you trying to accomplish? Keep that in the front of your brain. And then finally, know when to pivot. Some conversations will not go well. Know how to end them. Know how to pivot in a way that preserves the relationship and keeps you together. So remember, two big things. One, commit to not privilege the comfort of a racist person or of you in these conversations. It is worth being uncomfortable to confront evil things that can lead to violence and pain for other people's bodies. Racism is evil. Diminishing someone else on the basis of race is evil. Diminishing someone else on their gender is evil. Talking about someone else's body or what good they're for, or totalizing a whole people group is evil. Don't privilege and don't protect that point of view. That can't be your main goal. And then secondly, I would say keep the relationship alive, like we've already talked about. And I think the best way to do that is by being metacognitive. And what I mean by metacognitive is just to talk about Talk about the way you're talking. Talk about the way you're feeling. Talk about what's happening around the edges as you're talking with someone. And so it's been very effective in my experience. If a person, you can feel it when a person feels defensive or attacked or starts to shut down or starts to escalate or starts to lean back on their heels. And so one of the things you can do is to keep the relationship alive by saying out loud, gosh, did you feel how tense it just got? I did not mean to bring that kind of tension on. I'm sorry. Do you feel attacked? Like, tell me how you feel, right? Or I know it's so easy to get defensive. I would feel really defensive if someone said that to me too. Can you just hang with me for a second? Can you stay here even though it's awkward? Can you keep listening? Can we keep talking? Can you tell me how you feel? Be metacognitive as you're discussing these things. And so I've put together 5 or 6 little scenarios, and I'll just sort of talk through some things that you might say. And these are just things that I have used before. I cannot tell you how to attack every single conversation, but I hope that by sort of hearing things that hearing some of the scenarios that I've created, that you can begin to imagine, what are things that I would be comfortable saying? How could I approach this? So if a friend uses coded language, which is a way to talk about race or poverty or exclusion without talking about race or poverty or exclusion, then a lot of us encounter those moments all the time. So for instance, a person says, oh, don't go to school there, that's a failing school. Or don't go to that neighborhood, that's a disastrous, or that's a bad area. Or I wouldn't be caught dead in that place. Something like that is a way often to talk about a majority Black space without saying, I'm racist and I'm afraid of Black people, right? And so if a friend uses coded language, you can say something like, oh, I'm not familiar with that school or that neighborhood or that area. What do you mean? Like, don't give them the benefit of assumption. Don't allow them to know that you know what they mean without saying what they mean. Make them say it out loud. Or if someone says something about an area, say, oh, wow, tell me all about the time you've spent there. Like, wow, when did you get to know that area? Or how'd you get to know those people, right? Or who do you spend time with from that area of the country? Again, make them be explicit, and then wait for the awkward pause. So don't wipe away the awkward pause. Another option is to be a little more confrontational, only in a way that uses your experience. So you could say, yeah, I know what you mean, but I'm learning that our community has failed that area, not that they're failures. Everybody has like huge heroes and big jerks. And then say, have you heard about an area of town that has really turned things around? So a school that used to be, failing according to state standards and tests and is now thriving. There are lots of schools like that. Or an area that used to be riddled in crime and is now like a beacon of community hope. There are areas like that. If you don't know those areas, then get to know your city, because every area has pockets that are still mostly feared and avoided by white folks that are actually like beautiful pictures of community by anyone else who cares to pay attention. So in that example, you actually are confronting what they said, but you're using your experience. You're not just accusing them of being a terrible person. Okay, so what if you have a friend who demeans someone or sort of jokes in an inappropriate way? This can be about gender or about race, about religion, about all kinds of things. So often I will use humor and just absolutely say how I feel. Not in an accusing way, but I will just say it and then let it be awkward. So sometimes if someone says something about females or about people of color or other religions, I'll say, oh, wow, that is offensive. Sorry, that really took me off guard. And then just don't say anything. Don't make them feel better. Don't prioritize their comfort. Just wait. Another option is to acknowledge what they said. And again, rely on your experience, not a statistic, not a news blurb. You could say something like, I hear what you're saying. I've had a really different experience working with X group of people. Or you could say, you could invite them into your experience and say, gosh, I know a lot of people think that. If you ever want to get to know this community, though, I'd love to take you. Are you busy Thursday? Invite them to come have their own experience. That way you're not sort of overtly, aggressively confronting their perspective, but you're inviting them into a different way of engaging that community that will base it on experience instead of stereotype. And then the final option I would give you is to actually confront what they said. And again, use your own experience and stand your ground. I used to think the same thing, but my mind has been blown by getting to know women at work or something. I honestly think success and respect are harder to earn for women or for people of color or for immigrants, for whomever. You are great, but it's hard for me to hear you joke like that. So that is a reconciling, like, I value you. I'm not cool with what you just said, but it's based on my experience. It's not because I'm trying to be PC. I used to even agree with you. So that uses concession. And then, like, my experience has changed my mind. It's really hard for me to hear things like that now because it's so different than what I've experienced, right? So those are some options for how you could handle that situation. Another encounter that I know a lot of us have had are people complaining about handouts and how the moochers just live on the government. And so if you hear something like that, again, I rely on my experience and say something like, I hear you. I can't personally agree because my grandfathers used the GI Bill, and I'm so thankful for the stability that they passed down to me because of it. Or my family got, a first-time home buyer benefit, and I'm so thankful that we have a home because of it. So gently reinforce, without agreeing with them, that we all benefit from the government, that all of us have benefited from handouts from the government, that we can't just draw a line in some arbitrary way to demonize some people. Another option is to use a statistic based on your experience. So you could say something like, it does seem insane, but did you know you can work full-time and still live below the poverty line and qualify for food stamps? A lot of poor people I know work much harder than I do. So again, that's introducing new knowledge. It's relying on your own experience. It's not really starting a fight with them, but it is gently offering a different perspective than what they just said, which is that people who get handouts are lazy. If people talk about immigration in the same way, you could say, concede first. I do think our immigration system is broken. I wish we would enforce the law on employers who exploit instead of blaming people who get jobs that are offered to them and usually pay taxes and can't even receive any benefits, right? Now that's tricky. You're getting way more into statistics and sound bites and things like that, but you could reframe it in a way that doesn't just demonize people who are working illegally. Someone's hiring them, and those people are probably wealthy white people. So you can reframe where the blame goes, at least. And then finally, a great option for pivoting, which I would say could often happen around a handout conversation, is to say, I can tell this really fires you up and I am all here for it. Why don't you give me a call and we can share notes? I don't want to bore our friends. I'm going to go to the bathroom and I'll be right back, and then walk away. So if you try to pivot, it might work while you stay there, but the best kind of pivots to end a conversation are for you to end with some sort of reconciling, respectful discourse, and then say, I gotta run, get some water, I'll be right back, walk away, because that just automatically cools people down, okay? So know when to pivot, know when it's not going well. Okay, another idea is when you're confronting a belligerent boss, and this is rough. I just wanna say, power dynamics are tricky. Job security matters. You don't want to rock a boat that you can't survive if you get thrown out. And so I would say weigh that line of like how you need to keep your job against the line of what you're willing to live with what's said and done around you. And commit to whatever course of action works for you. We are responsible, though, for how people talk around us. And if we don't disagree with them, then they think we agree with them. And that damages other people's lives. So when I've had a boss or an authority figure sort of go off on, politics or the federal government or corruption or whatever, I try to redirect it to our local environment. So you could say something like, concede first. I agree, federal corruption seems rampant. How can our company contribute locally since our city has been so good to us? So take it back to what your company can do in this moment, either in a good way or a protesting way to change action, right? So bring it, let your boss know, I am uninterested in hearing you rant about the president or his opponents. I'm very interested in helping strengthen our company and our relationship with our city. So pivot in that way. Another way you could say it, and takes some courage, is just, and I've said this at work before to not a boss, but a more senior colleague than me. You could say, I guess I see it differently. I don't feel threatened at all by the success or presence of others. I think we live in a great country and there's room for all of us to grow. So again, they might roll their eyes at you. They might think you're naive or dumb. But you've allowed them to say, you've reframed what they said. And this is about you feeling threatened or bothered. This is not about the inherent lack of worth of an immigrant, right? Or of a person coming into our country. Another option is to just actively listen. This also takes a lot of courage, but you could say, oh, wow, tell me how your rights have been taken away. That sounds awful. So if you have a boss or a senior colleague who's ranting about their civil rights being taken away, or ranting about how the country's changed, or how they're uncomfortable in their own hometown now, or whatever, or how the office environment is so PC now that they can't function the way they want to function, just like, gosh, that sounds terrible. Like, tell me how things have changed for you. Because eventually they'll have to, instead of operating on assumption, they'll have to name, I don't like it when I'm not in charge and get to do whatever I want to do, right? And so you're inviting them into a process of self-reflection. The other option, if someone's complaining about workplace diversity or affirmative action or something like that, you could say, I love getting to work with different kinds of people. It takes adjusting. It can be hard, but our company will make better decisions if more people have a seat at our table. So again, you're communicating, I care about our company thriving. I'm not trying to be some crazy liberal. I am trying to add value to our company by recognizing that there is great strength that's untapped by bringing on perspectives that differ from yours. 2 more here. So one is talking to the parents. Really difficult for a lot of people. A lot of people have reached out about this one. And for this, I would just, again, preserve the relationship, know what your goal is, know what you're willing to confront and what you need to pivot from, and know yourself. For me, I have a much higher propensity to get heated and inappropriate and hurtful when I'm talking to a certain person in my family. I should know that because I'm responsible for how I treat other people. And so if you know that's you, then own that. So I might say something like, does it seem like I've gone off the deep end? So again, that's being metacognitive. If your parents kind of treating you like with a giant eye roll that you've lost your way, name that and say, oh, does it seem like I've gone off the deep end? I actually think I sort of landed here because of the way you raised me. You taught me to blah, 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 blah. And so if you can, that's a way to concede to them, to build connection points, to say, this is a product of what you actually believe in. Me having compassion for other people, me taking the hurt of other people seriously is a deep thing that you taught me, right? So affirm their best selves, even when they're denying their best selves. You could also say something like, I know I seem like a crazy young person and it probably feels ridiculous to you. I'm so thankful we can still talk about hard things and disagree. Thanks for listening to me. So that's a way to pivot and end the conversation. And again, I'm going to go get some water, or I'm going to go check on the kids, or I'm going to go outside. So if things are not going well, or if they are going well, but you can feel yourself escalating, then just say like, I know that I probably seem ridiculous to you. I'm so thankful though for our relationship. I'm so grateful we can still talk. Thanks for listening, right? And walk away. They don't have to agree with you. If they listen at all, that's a good thing. Another way, and this might sound a little manipulative, but you could say, I think because you gave me such a solid foundation, I really want to help others get the same start we had. The world is different than when you came up, and I can't imagine how weird that is for you. but I know you want your grandkids to thrive in a diverse world. So, I mean, pulling out the grandkid card is a little intense. I agree. But they do want their grandkids to thrive in a diverse world. And they might want their grandkids to thrive in a world that is like the world that they grew up in 1950. But that world's gone. It's not coming back. And so if you can help them see that your points of view are different than theirs, and you know that because you grew up differently than they did, but that the generosity they showed you is feeding you to have generosity for others, and that this is a way for you to protect and provide for your own kids, that's just a win. And then the final thing, and I actually saw someone in my family do this weekend over the 4th of July. They just asked my parents, like, did you ever have conversations about race or women or immigrants or monuments when you were growing up? What was it like? Did you ever disagree with your mom and dad? Like, how did you change your views? So instead of acting like America has been totally consistent and fabulous until we've all gone off the deep end in this generation, or like, oh, the millennials, right? Like these kinds of exaggerative moments, instead of buying into that, remind them of their own story. Remind them of when they felt like they had no connection points with their parents. Remind them when they saw the world differently than their elders did, and sort of invite them, honor that history by asking them to tell you about it. I promise you it will de-escalate the situation. And then finally, the last scenario I wanted to offer is just when you're accused of being brainwashed, which I get a lot. I have gotten this a lot from parts of the church that I worship in. I've gotten this a lot from family members, and just various people. And so again, I think the best way to handle these situations is to check your own defensiveness. Don't get all fired up and escalated. When you get defensive, you can't listen. You can't find reconciliation. You can't find points of connection. And so instead, I would try to do something like, oh, does my view seem really extreme to you? Can you tell me how? Awkward pause. Just let it happen. Another thing that you could say if someone, and I've done this before, and it's hard, it takes courage, but it's really powerful, is if someone basically calls you an extreme something, or that you've gone off the edge, say, oh, that's hurtful. I know we live really differently, but I think my views are really consistent with my value system and with the experiences that I've had with others. So acknowledge you think I'm a crazy person, and that kind of hurts my feelings. But I've really thought about the way I live, and I'm cool with it. I'm going to go get some water, right? You can pivot and bail again. But you can acknowledge, like, oh, that's really hurtful. Gosh, we really see the world so differently. Another way, and this is requiring you to be metacognitive, if someone is escalating and calling you, an extreme person, or that you've gone off the deep end, or that you've forgotten about your roots, or whatever, you could say, I can tell that upset you. My caring about this actually grew out of my love for my family, or my sense of patriotism, or my faith system. So root your belief system in your belief system. They are calling your beliefs sort of an aberration from your roots. But for you, I hope they're rooted in your roots. And so rename them as part of your whole belief system. So you could say, I can tell that upset you. My caring about this actually grew out of my sense of patriotism or my faith system. Maybe I'll change as I grow, but I know where I stand right now, right? So again, you're not asking them to agree with you or to applaud you or to sort of celebrate you're awesome. You're just saying, I can tell we're on really different sides here, but I came here actually because of how I view the Bible or the country or the whatever. And so this is where I'm going to land. And then you can pivot and walk away. Or if they want to say more, be willing to listen. And then finally, you can always root it back in experience. And again, this work only works if you're walking the talk. If you're only all words and only arguing with people, but your life hasn't changed, it's going to be really hard for you to convince yourself or others that you find value in places that are hard to find value. And so you could say, I hear you. I'm sorry you think I've gone off the deep end. I just couldn't hold on to that perspective once I started spending time with poor people, or in the jail, or went to court, or got to know this minority group, or spent time in this school system. And so again, it's your experience. Nobody can take your experience away from you. You're not trying to convince them of how you feel. You're just trying to say, I'm sorry that this is hard for you. I just couldn't hold on to that point of view once I actually started to talk to people who I was talking about, you know? So I hope that that is helpful. I just will lay it at your feet and offer it as an offering to try to help us begin to think. Again, I don't think that we can, any of us can use someone else's exact dialogue to sort of give us a roadmap for how to have these conversations. But I think if you know where you want to land, and you know what you're willing to hold on to and what you're willing to confront, and you don't center the comfort of a person spouting evil, then we'll be on our way to some anti-racist work. And so I'll just end with a few ideas. One is that Edward Abbey is this wild man who helped establish some of our national parks. And he, my favorite quote of his is, "The sentiment without action is the ruin of the soul." And as we wrap up our backyard conversations, I will just like lay that at your feet and say that if you have had new sentiments, and if you have had new thoughts and new convictions and new questions arise and new ways of seeing the world, if you don't take action on those sentiments, I think it'll ruin your soul. And I mean that with all the humility and love and compassion that I can muster. I, for a long time, knew that I was living differently than my like deepest value system and convictions wanted me to. And it was really painful and really hard. And so I'll just offer that to you as a way of thinking about where you actually want to take action. So every week we've ended with thinking about where we want to invest and where we want to divest. And these are actually back more closely related to the parenting section. I should have included it there, but I forgot. So I'm going to put it here. And so when you think about how to invest, one of the things we've talked about in this series is to think about what public action you want to take, what relational commitment you want to make, and then what personal practice you want to start. And so I would just say around parenting, around thinking about our youth, where are you willing to invest in your kids' ability to thrive in a diverse world? What public action will you take to help your kids, all kids, thrive in a diverse world? What relational commitment, like who will you be willing to talk to or talk to differently in order to help kids thrive in a diverse world? And then what personal practice are you going to put into place, right, for you or for your family around these ideas? And then when we think about divesting, I'll just say that do the hard work of establishing your own lines. We talked about this in the third session. What's your line around pulling your kids out of 100% white or wealthy places and activities? If you don't establish your own line, other people will establish it for you. And so I encourage you to think about what your line is there. As we come to an end, I'm going to read to us from this fabulous book, which has kind of been all the rage in COVID, I feel like, but it's beautiful. And I'm just gonna read it to us. I won't do another breathing exercise, but I think it's a really beautiful book about different people establishing a friendship in ways that are surprising. And so this is the end of the book. "What's your best discovery?" asked the mole. "That I'm enough as I am," said the boy. "I've realized why we are here," whispered the boy. "For cake?" asked the mole. "To love," said the boy. "And to be loved," said the horse. "What do you do when our hearts hurt?" asked the boy. "We wrap them with friendship, shared tears and time, till they make hopeful and happy again." "Do you have any other advice?" asked the boy. "Don't measure how valuable you are by the way you are treated," said the horse. "Always remember, you matter. You're important and you are loved. and you bring to the world things no one else can. Home isn't always a place, is it? Thank you. And as we close, I will just add to those words a few other words from Dr. King and then from Mother Teresa to remind us that we are all connected. Dr. King said, "Moreover, I'm cognizant of the interrelatedness of all communities and states. I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Never again can we afford to live with a narrow provincial outside agitator idea. Anyone who lives inside the United States can never be considered an outsider." And then I'll close with reminding us that Mother Teresa said, "If we have no peace, it's because we've forgotten that we belong to each other." And as you begin and continue and keep walking on your road toward being an anti-racist ally and a person who relentlessly seeks compassion and seeks to listen before you try to understand or explain, and increases your own capacity to hurt with and to stand beside broken people and hurting people, I'll just remind us that we belong to each other. We're connected in this network of mutuality. And our privilege as white people has allowed us to not believe that for a long time. But the more time I spend with people who don't look like me, the more I realize that I desperately need them. And so I am so grateful that you cared enough to come to my backyard and listen to these conversations. I hope that whatever is good and helpful will continue to rise up out of it. And I hope that whatever I've said that is offensive or hurtful will fall away. And I hope that you will all continue to live as if everything said and done around you matters deeply and is your responsibility. Contact me at expandyourus@gmail.com if you want to talk more or if you want more resources. I'm Brandy Kellett, and I really appreciate you spending some time with me.